Hey, this is Tom. Welcome to the shop. This is the time of year, it's mid-December, when you push aside the furniture making part of work and you gotta make a few gifts. So I have discovered one of the best gifts that gives you the most bang for your buck, and that is making an end grain cutting board. Here's the end grain cutting board I'm gonna show you how to make right now. And what I love about this is it's not a lot of investment of time and energy and really not that much materials. You can even use scraps from your shop. But the wow factor for that amount of time and the substantial feel of a gift, boy, someone is going to be very happy with you come Christmas this year. So I want to show you how to get started with the material right from the rough stage. I'm using cherry on this board. Some other good woods to use are like hard maple. I've seen some people use walnut. It's a little pricier. It's also an open grain wood. So I would stay away from the open grain woods like especially oak or ash, something that's really porous. This is a tighter grain wood, and cherry's not the hardest wood, but on the end grain, it is plenty hard for a cutting board. And I like the color you get. It turns into a dark, well, kind of a medium brown gold, reddish, and over time it'll deepen in color and look really beautiful for many years to come. So to make this project, you just need some 6/4 material. I'm using kind of a wide plank, and I'm going to cut this up into long strips, approximately 2 1/8 wide. Rough them out from this plank. I'm going to need 9 of those, and then I'm going to have one that's about 1 1/4 inches or so at the end. So I'll show you what that's for in a minute. So you need 9 like this, and I'm roughing them to length is 20 inches long. So I like 6/4 because of the thickness you get. It doesn't take as many blocks to make the whole width of the board. In fact, it just takes 9 to get 12 1/2, 12 3/4. And we're going to dress this down to give us the maximum thickness we can. But let's say we get back to our solid piece. First thing I have to do is rip this into strips. Now this is a rough sawn piece of wood. It's not flattened yet. So what I want to do to maximize the yield and thickness is I want to rip these into the narrower strips before I flatten them. That way I'll end up with a greater yield of thickness. If I tried to flatten this wide board right now, I don't know if you can see that, but it's got a nice curve to it. So I would flatten this side, and then by the time I got the other side true to it, my boards would be much thinner. So the first thing we'll do is rip these apart. Now here's an important tip. You never want to use a table saw with wood like this that's kind of curved or warped. That's the most dangerous thing really that can happen on a table saw, other than sticking your hand in the blade, of course. But what would happen is, because it's wobbly, the board will be fed into the table saw blade, and that piece can quite easily bind between the blade and the fence. And if it binds and you lose control of it, that piece will rocket back at about 200 miles an hour, which can do some serious damage. So that's called kickback. So whenever you're using a table saw, you always want to have the material nice and flat. So how are we going to rip this? Well, we're going to use a bandsaw. A bandsaw cuts downward. It's really the safest saw in the shop, pretty much. So what I've already done is jointed one edge, and we're going to take this over to the bandsaw, and I want to get 4 more strips out of this, and then my 1 1/4 at the end. So here we go. Let's head over to the bandsaw. All right, so now I've got all my parts roughed out to rough dimension. And you can see I've got 9 of the 2 by 20, a 2 1/8 by 20. And I have this one narrow one that I'm going to use for my narrow strip. Now, one thing to do is, it's nice if you can get all your pieces from the same plank. At least I like that look. That way you get a more harmonious color in your finished board. If you like a little contrast and your material isn't fully heartwood, you can leave some of the sap in, which looks like a little whiter point, you know. So in this board, I don't know if you can pick this up, but this is getting close to the sap, these little corners here. And on this edge, you can see this whiter swath is sapwood. I'm trying to avoid it completely on this board that we're going to make right now, so that we just don't have any of that look. But we'll get a nice random looking pattern of end grain. All right, so once I've got my pieces roughed out like this, the next step is I have to flatten one face of these rough pieces. I want to true that up and get it good and flat and true on the joiner. So I'm going to pass all my pieces over the joiner, and then we'll run them through the thickness planer with the jointed flattened side down on the table, and the thickness planer will take off just enough until both surfaces are parallel. Now I want to try to take the minimal amount off so that I get the thickest yield and we get the widest board. And then once we're done getting both sides parallel, we're going to work on the edges and get ready for gluing them up. All right, so let's head over to the joiner and the planer and we'll get these all trued up. All right, we're here at the joiner, which will flatten one surface of this wood. Now, one little tip when using the joiner to get the most yield out of the board is if the board has a bow in it, like it's curved from end to end, like this, we want to put the bow side down. You'd want the crown side being up, okay? So this piece is pretty straight, but there's a very slight bow in the bottom. The reason we do that is because when we come to the joiner and you set it down on the table, you can see the ends are both on the table, but if you turn it upside down, you'll get more of a rocking motion. And if you happen to be bearing down too much on one end, you're going to take a lot more passes until you get it all cleared up at this end. And then by the time you plane the other side, you'll be quite a bit thinner than you wanted. So by putting the bowed side down, you'll be just at first taking off both ends, and then you'll get a nice clean pass more quickly with taking off the least amount of material. So here we go. Let's get our safety equipment and we'll get started. Okay, we've got one face all jointed, true and flat. And now this face will ride on the table on this thickness planer, and it's going to be cutting a parallel cut off the top. So I want to set this, so I'm just taking a fairly light cut. I'll run them all through, and once I see if I still have some to clean off one, I'll just run them all through till they're good. But we should end up pretty close to 1.5 inches because we've taken just a very light cut off of the joiner. All right, so let's get started. All right, we've got all our pieces dressed on both sides, two surfaces parallel and flat to each other. And now I'm going to measure, and wow, I've got a full 1.5 inches. So that's really good out of 6/4 stock. 6/4 means 1.5 inches rough. So that's a term that I use at the sawmill. It's usually sawn about 1 5/8 inches thick. So to be able to dress that down and get 1.5 inches is about as most you'll ever get. Now, what I want to do is joint one edge here. Now, I'm going to go up on edge against the fence and skim and true now a third edge. Then we'll go to the table saw, and I'm going to rip them at just over 2 inches. So here we go. I'm going to true one edge, and then we'll rip at the table saw. Okay, we're here at the table saw. I've got that one edge nice and square, jointed true. So now I'm going to index that edge on the fence. Now I have a truly flat, square piece of material. So this is when it's much safer to use the table saw. So what I'm going to do is just rip these pieces just almost 2 1/16. And that'll give us enough material to joint off both edges, and we'll end up with approximately our 2-inch wide pieces. All right, here we go. All right, I've ripped 9 pieces. My 10th, I want that narrower piece, that 1.25 inches. So I'm going to reset the fence. And this is the piece that has a bit of sap on it. So we'll be ripping that off, and we'll have a pure heartwood cutting board. Here we go. All right, back at the bench, I've got the 9 pieces and my 1 1/4. And now's where we start to get a little creative with it. I like a random look of the end grain. If you can see this end grain, this piece has the grain running diagonally, or rift, as they would say. This one's horizontal in plane, or plane sawn with the surface here. Here's another diagonal, another this. So what I'm going to do is just mix and match them so that everything is kind of random going across, but I don't have two matched up right next to each other. So I'm going to flip this one. I don't like that, so I'll go end for end. That's good. Now I have this coming up, straight across. We're diving down, we're going up. That's looking good. So we've got kind of an uneven rolling grain on the ends here. And once I get that all set up, what I want to do is true the ends. This will be my true end on this end. So I want to get that approximately square. I've got over length, so it's not super critical, but just want to make my guideline here with it approximately square. That's good. Okay, so now this will be my direction that I want to glue them up in. So what I'm going to do is make a giant kind of V shape That way I could get these mixed up and I can get them back in order. Now I'm going to make one straight line over here. This will help me to align them properly during glue up without worrying about the ends. I'm just going to have that line fit when I'm gluing them up. Now we have one edge on most of these that's sawn and one edge that's jointed, but these are not ready to glue up yet. The joints look pretty good, but we want to run them through the joiner one more time so that we get a good accurate fit, and we want it to be flat. Now, one of the things that you want to do is when you glue this up, you want it to stay flat. And one of the keys to doing that is the way you joint them. So if you put orientation arrow kind of like this, and think of yourself as feeding all these pieces through the joiner in the same direction. So I'm going to joint this edge going through, then I'll turn it and I'll go in this direction again. So what happens is the piece next to it will go through with the face against the fence, and then this piece will go through with the bottom against the fence. When they come together, if there's any error in your fence, it will be canceled out on the joint, and you'll end up with a perfect joint that will give you a true flat surface. Now, all that depends on how well you've set up your joiner. So you really have to make sure your joiner is tuned up, the knives are sharp, the outfeed table is in perfect plane with the apex of your knives, and you'll get a beautiful cut with no snipe at the end. So I'm going to take these back over to the joiner. We'll joint these edges one more time, going all through the same direction, and then we'll be ready to glue them up. Let's go. All right, we're back at the bench, getting ready for glue up. I've got all my strips in on the clamps, so I got it kind of set up, the clamps are the right space apart. And I've got these additional caul blocks, which are going to prevent me from denting the material too much. And they help spread the pressure out. On wider pieces like this, it's not as big a deal, but my particular clamps, these are Jorgensen bar clamps, and they're very strong. You really want to go to some stronger clamps to do this because you're clamping up really 9 seams. So mine on the bottom of these clamps, they're angled strongly. So I actually sawed that angle into my brace clamp. So what that does is it keeps this caul from turning up like that. So I've canceled out that angle, so I've got a good flat pressure on there. But I've got them all oriented in here with my V back here. And now what I want to do is get some glue going. So what I'm going to do is turn everything up on its edge like this. I want to glue this edge, all the way across. I don't need to glue that edge because this glue will be pressed against there. So I'll take these all together in order and set them down right here, a little flatter surface. And then we'll move them back into the cauls. So what I'm going to do is get the glue. I'm using Tite Bond 3. It's waterproof, which is nice because you're probably going to be exposed to some water with these boards over time. The trick is putting on enough, but not too much. It's easier to put a little more on than it is to take it off. So I'm putting a good bead down twice on each one. Now, once I get the bead on there, I want to smear it out. Rather than using my finger, I'm going to use a little roller. Now, if you were in production making several of these on one Saturday or weekend, it'd be a good idea to have a small glue roller, like a 3 or 4 inch paint roller you can use with like a 1/4 or 3/8 inch nap. You can wrap it in plastic after, and it will last quite a while. You just pour the glue right into a rolling tray, and you'll just get it out and you'll just be rolling it right on. It'll save you some time. It's looking good. Just want to make sure I've got a good healthy coating on there. This coating is going to get pressed into the other face. I'll make sure we have a good coverage, no bare spots. And just kind of even it out. That looks great. All right, so I'm going to just start with this end. I'm going to turn it down and back to my first piece. What I like to do is give it a little bit of a rub fit. And I'm seeing the glue squeeze out all the way along. And I'll set it right so that guideline is in line. Pick the next piece and repeat it. This rub fit distributes the glue really well on the other piece. You almost feel it suction in. And we just continue on all the way across all 10 pieces. Now, one of the things I tried to do while I was laying these out was if I had any bad ends, like here I've got a chip out, I tried to put them all to the same end, because I know after I saw the next stage, I'm going to be left with about an inch, almost an inch of waste on one end. So I could put my defects down there. If you have material that has knots in it, or defects on the face like this, you can put those all to one side, and that can just be the bottom of your board. That actually won't happen until we do our next cut, but you'll see what I mean by that. Okay, we've got all that glue nicely rub fit in. All our seams are good, and that line is pretty close to being straight on. Now I just want to bring my clamps up, snug. Okay, now it's good to have a rubber mallet or something. What I want to make sure is that these boards are flat on this rail. These I-beam rails are pretty true, so if it maintains flatness there, I know I've got a true flat cut on this piece. Okay, so I'm just going to gently snug, and it's coming up a little at the end there. Those seams all feel pretty nice, so I'll snug it a bit more. Feels good. That's just a slightly up at the end there. That's good. Now I'll go to the other end. Now I can feel, if I'm flush, They're all pretty close to flush here. I'll go ahead and snug this one. And I can see that's staying very nice and flat. And see on the surface here, you're getting good squeeze out along every joint. That's a good sign that we've got good pressure and adequate amount of glue. So I'll snug those up. Now for insurance, I'm going to throw one more over the top. This clamp, let's see. Got this little angle block to cancel out that angle. And I just want to get some good pressure here. I know it's going to be staying pretty flat. And that's it. That's a nice glue up. So you can see all that good glue up. All these joints are nice and tight. And on the bottom, we see a nice bead of glue all the way across. That's what you want. If you get too much, it's okay. You'll just have more to clean off after. So I'm going to set this aside. And what we're going to do is move to the next phase. I'm going to stick my glue roller back in the water so it doesn't harden up on there. And sort of like Julia Child, I'm going to get my next one out of the oven. So here it is. This is what that plank will look like after it comes out of the clamps. Again, I've got my 9 2-inch wide pieces all the way across, and then my 1 1/4 inch at the end. Now I've got some glue on that surface, and you can see the beads squeezing out here, and the black is just where it's touching the rail a little bit. But I shake this down, it looks pretty flat. That's good. So the first thing I want to do is get off that excess glue. I'm going to put it into the bench dogs here. Hold it tight. Just use a good old paint scraper and get that glue off. All right, that feels pretty good. Now, flip. And we're ready to get this glue. Whew. This is where it starts getting physical and you start to get a little exercise with the project. But that's only going to increase because what we need to do is true up this surface and flatten it and then flatten that. So if you were in production, you'd want to have a drum sander or wide belt sander or something like that, that you could just send this through and get that nicely sanded on one side, flip it over, and you can sand the other side. But I'm assuming most people don't have a sander. So I'm going to show you the good old-fashioned way, and that is by hand planing. So we're going to skim plane this surface until we get it good and flat, and then we're going to flip and do the same on the other side. I will show you my drum sander, but only after I show you this method. All right, so I've got that nice and true. Now you've got to have a plane that's well tuned. This plane's in good shape. It's recently been sharpened up. Helps to wax the sole a little bit too. I've got a video of tuning up a hand plane. You can check that out if you're going to dive into this. All right, so it helps to go diagonally to true. Now, if your plane is tuned up, you're not pushing that hard. So you either have to take a lighter shaving, if you're really fighting it, a lighter shaving, make sure it's sharp, and a little wax on the sole. Everything will go better. All right, I'm still a little low here, so I'm gonna go across again. Oops, getting a little loose in there. All right, that's feeling pretty good. I feel a little bit of a edge digging. Set my plane. One more time, just lightly, a little diagonal. All right, that feels nice, nice and smooth. So I could check that with a straight edge. That's pretty flat. It's really good. So close enough for what we're gonna do, even if it was slightly out. Okay, now, I just wanna touch this up. If I feel anything hot, actually, it all feels so good, I don't even need to card scrape. But these are going to be sawn now into strips, then turned up on edge. That's what makes our end grain glue board, cutting board. So before I do that, I want to just lightly sand it. By sanding this hand plane surface, it makes the glue have more hair kind of to grab into. A hand plane surface is just almost polished because the fibers are sheared off. Okay, when I sand, I double up on the ends so that I don't end up going light on them. If I just went straight up and back, my sanding would be concentrated in here. So that's just a little habit That helps you sand evenly. Now I'm going to flip. And as if we haven't had enough exercise already, I've got to hit this side. All right. So again, I'm going to go diagonally, and then we'll smooth it out the surface. Same thing again. All right, that's it. Woo! 2 hand plane surfaces, dead flat. So if you don't have a drum sander or a wide belt sander, that's pretty much what you have to do. I suppose you could try it with just a handheld belt sander, but that can be tricky, and you're not really getting the leveling, the truing that you gain from a hand plane. I was using a number 5 older Stanley model, which has a good truing effect to it. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to square one end and then start taking my cuts. I'm going to use the sled at the table saw to make a good truing square cut there. So let's go back to the table saw and we'll get ready for our next step. Whew. All right, now we're back to the machines. We're going to cross cut right here on this glued up plank, and I've got my little index line. I'm going to slide it over until I hit the curved cut, and there I'm all set. My safety gear on, and here we go. Now you can really see the layers coming to the surface here, our nice random layout pattern. And we've got a true flat square edge. So what I want to do now with this edge is turn it, and that edge we just sawn is going to be indexing off of the fence. I'm going to put in my regular fence. Bring it up. Now, I want to remove this insert. It's a little overcut here. To reduce the amount of tear out when I'm cross-cutting here, I've made this 0 clearance insert. It's just a fresh insert, and I raise the blade very slowly so it cut up, and there's very little gap around the saw blade, so that the fibers on the crosscut will be supported and will resist blowing out and tearing out, as they say. So I've got this in here. I've also got that little green splitter back there. That'll adds a measure of safety so that the piece won't drift back and bind, but it'll keep true and sawn straight. Okay, so now I want to set my fence. Here's where you're deciding how thick your cutting board is going to be. Now, I've seen a good end grain cutting board, you don't want to be any less than 1.5 inches. I like to make them between 1 3/4 and 2 inches thick. It starts to feel a little more like a butcher block table, but it's on your countertop, so you feel a lot more secure with it, and it's going to last for generations if it's well cared for. So I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to go just below 2. So let's say 1 15/16. That'll give us a board that'll finish out close to 1 7/8. All right. Make sure my blade's high enough. It's good. Safety gear on. And now, what I'm going to do is make 9 cross cuts. So I'll get my 9 pieces, which will be turned up on edge, and that's going to create our end grain cutting board. So let's go. All right, let's go back to the bench. Here we go. We are getting close. We're going to start seeing the end grain cutting board emerge right now.